How this guy ended up with his dream car will surprise and inspire you. For most people, their car is much more than just a way to get around. People tend to become attached to their vehicle of choice, especially if they've put their hard-earned money into repairs and upgrades for it. Unfortunately, not everyone can afford their dream car, but that doesn't always stand in the way of finding it. For Kyle Cropsey of Lynn with him even going so far as to name it Matilda. Chris's late father, Cornelius, had taken Matilda on many adventures in his time, and he eventually drove it so often that the odometer could no longer track his mileage. How could Chris possibly let it go and sell it to someone else? He eventually made up his mind, and he decided that a classic car that was in such good condition deserved to be out on the road again. Luckily for